This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network. If you are interested in the mysterious and unexplained, then you wouldn't want to miss the upcoming conference presented by the Unidentified Network. This event will host a variety of speakers and signing opportunities from the most respected researchers and personalities from all over the world. You can enjoy interactive exhibits and vendors all centered around the fascinating world of cryptids. Whether you are a seasoned cryptozoology enthusiast or just curious about these elusive creatures, there is something for everyone at the Cryptid Conference UK. Don't miss this chance to connect with fellow fans and learn more about the world's most elusive creatures. Join us for an unforgettable event and connect with fellow fans from all over the world. July 20th, 2024, Highbridge, Somerset. The Unidentified Network proudly presents the Cryptid Conference UK.
And there we go, guys. There is our big announcement. We have our Cryptid Conference UK. Now, I see the chat is starting to kind of build up here. Hi, Mike. Hi, Harlem. We have two amazing people that are going to help me announce this amazing conference. And one of them, you guys will know very, very, very well, and he's a very, very respected person in the Bigfoot community. I'm going to add our first guest that is going to be speaking at this conference, and he's also founder of the UK BRT here in the UK. Hi, Chris. How are you, mate?
Hi, Daniel. How are you doing?
I'm very, very well. We have an amazing person backstage, don't we? I'm about to add on.
One of my favourites.
So, guys, please welcome the man of Bigfoot, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. Hi, Dr. Meldrum. How are you?
Nice.
I'm great, thank you.
Brilliant. So we have a very, very big announcement to make, guys. So Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum is going to be virtually at our event. He's going to be giving a virtual talk, and I can't wait to hear it. And Chris Alsford is going to be giving a talk at our event personally, and will also be helping me host the event as well. So, you've had one comment. So let's kind of start with you, Dr. Meldrum, and would you like to kind of say a little bit about yourself first? I know a lot of people know a lot about you, but go ahead.
Well, sure. Well, let me start off by saying that I'm happy to report that I'm not dead yet. I was pretty darn close at a couple of points, and it was a kind of a scary, wild adventure. And I want to thank everyone who shared their well wishes and support and prayers. And so it come a long way over the past several months, and still have a bit further to go to be up to snuff. But it's great to be able to ring in the new year on this side of the daisies instead of pushing them up. So let's see. I have obviously, as you can see, I've been at this for quite some time, and I have my roots literally clear back in the days I can remember buying John Green's book in the mail for like $3, and I can remember the first book I got as a gift for Christmas from Santa. The first time I asked for a book instead of a a new GI Joe accessory kit or something, was Ivan Sanderson's Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life, which I devoured and learned geography through the reading and rereading of that book. So my experience goes way back to my youth, and of course had many latent periods. And then I had the good fortune of being able to pursue a career in researching and teaching a topic that topics multiple that I am fascinated by. And this question of hominoids around the world, as Sanderson had proposed back in the 60s, dovetailed very nicely with my research program, specializing in hominoid and hominin, especially locomotion. And so, you know, I have studied many examples of footprints attributed to Sasquatch, but also examples of other relic hominoids on the basis of their footprint evidence, even in some cases meager as it is. And it is a fascinating body of data that attests, speaks, argues very persuasively for the existence of these things. I've also lived long enough to see my own discipline mature to the point where a context for such creatures, such species, now has been created through a much expanded understanding of the hominin and hominoid, more broadly, us and apes, our evolutionary history and our family tree, which has gotten bushier and bushier and bushier with multiple lineages, and many of those lineages persisting into the very recent past, much more so than would have been acknowledged just 20, 25 years ago. And so now there is a context. I mean, it's not just a question, in fact, it's not a question anymore of the possible existence of such species, but rather a question of probabilities based on the objective evidence that can be marshaled to argue for them in the absence of a physical specimen or physical evidence. Ultimately, that's what's I think it's going to take, especially in this day and age with AI and all the computer graphics and the things that make it more and more challenging as information becomes more broadly disseminated. So let me put it at that point and let you give the reins back to you, Daniel.
Well, I will say that Dr. Meldrum, you are very liked in this Bigfoot world, and I will say, going back to kind of you getting well, me and the whole team, when I heard that you were unwell, I think one of my team almost cried.
Oh.
So we are so glad to see you up and running again.
I appreciate it.
So is this the first time that you will be kind of broadcasting something here in the UK?
I was trying to remember that as I was coming into work into my office this morning. I think it is. I don't think I have participated even virtually with any organization. I know I've watched several of conferences that have happened in the past, especially those that featured at a time when it featured speakers about some of the Russian expeditions. They look for the almonds, and this will be the first. It will be.
Well, to all the people in the UK listening now, or will be listening to this on record, I sincerely hope that you make it to this conference, because I can say I will be sat down and my eyes will be straight on the screen, because I can't wait for your talk, Dr. Meldrum. So I'm going to bring up Dr. Meldrum's poster. So this is his poster here, and I haven't shown this to him yet, so I hope he likes it.
That's great.
So guys, you will see this posted online, and this will be kind of the Dr. Meldrum will be the headline of our event. Even though he's not there, he's going to be a virtual guest. And Chris, I can say we can't wait to have him.
Yes.
Can't we?
Yeah. I think I'm going to be stood at the door stopping too many people coming in. Well, we'll see. Just say all the comments coming in. Everybody's wishing you well, Dr. Meldrum, and everybody apparently loves listening to you. And Daniel, you're rocking it. Nobody's asking any questions yet, so feel free to bring it in.
Well, so before we go on to kind of asking you a few questions, Dr. Meldrum, I will say we have another guest here tonight. Chris Alsford will be there present at our event. Will be giving a talk, and he will be the first talk on. And here is his poster. I had to cut me out of that. So that will be Chris at our event. So keep an eye on him. He is almost as tall as Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin film. How tall are you, Chris?
Depends which TV show you watch.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm 6'4", which puts me 2 inches shorter than her on one of them, and I think 18 inches shorter on another one. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the middle of that camp. I put it between 6.5 and 7 feet. A little closer to 7 feet, and in a standing upright posture. But
yeah.
So, as we're on the topic of the Patterson-Gimlin film, could you give us a bit of kind of info, Dr. Meldrum, on your kind of now this may go into a massive rabbit hole, but kind of your kind of view on the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Well, first I would encourage everyone to get on and Google, and I'll send you the link so you can maybe post it on your webpage. But my most recent public documentary discussion of this topic was shared with Bill Munns and Isaac Tian. Isaac was a graduate student at the time in computer vision at the University of Washington. He's now graduated, and so he's a doctor now as well. But he brought some very interesting talent. So that between the three of us, we had this very synergistic discussion about the optimization using techniques which Isaac applied that allowed the superimposition of multiple copies of the film. Now, as your viewers may know, the original has been lost and is not in our possession for examination. But there are a whole sort of family of duplicates that have been produced, multi-generational in some cases. Originally, I think there were 5 or 6 first-generation copies and so on. Well, now realize, again, this ages some of us here in the conference that this is film, not a digital file of a video. Film with chemical emulsion applied to a plastic backing, a platen rather, and that the chemicals are arrayed as clusters of crystals of varying shapes and sizes, pretty uniform size depending on the resolution of the film. Obviously, the smaller the crystal, the better the resolution. Now you talked about a rabbit hole. I don't want to go into the whole talk, but the point is, by chasing down and digitally archiving multiple copies of the film, and multiple generations, and then by superimposing those, the little variances that have been introduced through the copying process of film to film can be sort of averaged out, if you will. And what emerges then is a very clarified image. And there are other techniques too, color channel splitting. It turns out that some of the colors were in more focus than others. I mean, there are 3 color channels, and the inexpensive lens on this camera produces chromatic aberration, where the diffraction of the individual colors is slightly offset, meaning some colors will be in very sharp focus and others will be slightly blurry. All of these factors taken into account, and what Isaac was able to do through 3D stabilization processing was produce the cleanest, clearest, most optimal copy of the film, short of the original, that we could produce. No enhancement, no information added, no extrapolation or interpolation of information, but rather just squeezing out the best, clearest, most consistent information. And so we discussed that process, and then comment on the things that could be observed as a result. There were no aha moments in that latter part. I mean, other than just the strikingly vivid depiction of what you see, and with its stabilized presentation, allowing your eye to fixate on features that were sometimes difficult to focus on in that gyrating, bouncing ball across the screen, that bouncing figure of Patty. So what we could do, though, is illustrate anatomical features and details that address questions of costume or not in much greater detail, and more convincingly demonstrate those to the things that we as professionals could see quite readily, but were not necessarily as obvious under the less than ideal conditions to the novice eye. So I highly recommended that. That's required viewing. And of course, you know, Bill Munns's book, When Roger Met Patty, is the authority on the history of and so forth of the film and its interpretation analysis. When I speak about the film, the thing that strikes me from the vantage of an anthropologist / anatomist is that the film predicts, anticipates by decades, things that eventually came to light in physical anthropology, in our understanding of the adaptations in anatomy and function in early bipedal hominids, of which Patty could easily be a member of that group. And so things like, well, for example, one of my favorites, Dr. John Napier was a very positive proponent of at least of the possibility of Sasquatch. He was very intrigued, and he was part of the original scientific panel constituted at the Smithsonian that viewed the film, the first to view it in the United States, the first scientific panel. Obviously, he was impressed enough that he went on, and as he went into retirement, he wrote a book about Sasquatch and the Yeti, excuse me. So, although, yeah, one of the things he said in that book was, although his opinion of the Patterson-Gimlin film was in general negative, he was forthright enough to acknowledge that he couldn't put his finger on just what it was that negated it in his mind. But with the exception of, and then he points out, he said, when I look at that figure from the waist up, I see an ape. From the waist down, though, it looks very human in its limb proportions. For such a hybrid, he called it a hybrid of structure, to exist in nature is just almost inconceivable. And so therefore, it must be contrived. Part of it has to be fake. And therefore, the whole thing fake. Well, it's interesting because that book of his was published in the early 70s, as I recall. And just a few years later, the announcement of the discovery of much more extensive fossil remains of Australopithecus afarensis were announced. In fact, of early Australopithecines, the species hadn't been described in its specific name of this group given quite yet. But Lucy, as she was called, the one specimen was called in colloquial terms, a remarkably complete or nearly complete skeleton. And how did they describe it? How did these experts describe it in the popular press? Isn't this interesting? They said from the waist up, it looks essentially like a chimpanzee, but from the waist down, it looks like a little hairy human.
Perfect match. Yeah.
Well, now wait a minute. That was the linchpin for John Napier, some 20 years ago or 10 years. Well, just a few years ago. One has to ask whether if Napier had postponed the writing of his book for 8 or 9 years, would his conclusions in the chapter on the Patterson-Gimlin film have been any different than they were at that time? And this, I can go down a laundry list of a half a dozen or more in the space of an hour cover of combinations of traits or particular adaptations exhibited by what you see in the Patterson-Gimlin film, which were absolutely counterintuitive in 1967. They cut against the grain of conventional wisdom in anthropology. But now, with the advantage of a 50-year hindsight, they fit right in with what we would expect for a bipedal hominin to exhibit. One with robust dental adaptations, chewing apparatus, jaws, and so forth, and other aspects of its anatomy. A flat, flexible foot with a non-divergent big toe, and so on. It's just fascinating. I mean, that, you'll throw Roger a bone and allow that he or whoever was coaching him, if he had a mentor in the wings that was orchestrating the construction of this elaborate costume, maybe just by dumb luck or coincidence, he stumbles on one odd feature that bears out over time, but to have 6, 7, 8 that are internally consistent and coordinated and and have analogous correlation with analogs discovered decades later. I mean, it's just
yeah. It's the hackles when they digitize the film. I mean, your explanation far more scientific, but I saw the hackles go up as she walked away.
Oh yeah!
Thought, wow, that's incredible. So yeah.
Wow, it's a really, really interesting mystery, and I've got to say that I watched that program, Dr. Meldrum. I would have said 3 days ago. I've watched it about five different times. I'm like, I keep spotting something new, it's an amazing program.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to pass on to kind of Chris, because I know he has a few questions for you, and he's bursting.
I also have a new one that I only found out about last year. The Dragon Man skull in China.
Oh, yes.
Homo longi. 6.5 inch wide skull, 9.5 inches long, big eye sockets. Do you think that could be evidence of our relic hominid?
Well, possibly. The Dragon Man skull is representative of a group that for the longest time has been sort of lumped together under the title Homo heidelbergensis. Heidelberg obviously is in Germany, in Europe, and examples of this grade of skull literally span the old world from Africa through Eurasia, and it's quite a distribution. There was a fascinating paper that was, if not the announcement, it was associated with the announcement of the dragon skull, that for the first time, at least it seemed that I was aware of, took a real stab at systematically breaking down the geographic implications of the distribution of this, of what has been called Homo heidelbergensis, and tried to understand its potential taxonomic subdivisions better. And this was an amazing. I mean, this was this being. It's been asserted that some of the specimens attributed to Homo heidelbergensis were rather gigantic in size. Lee Berger in South Africa has talked about this publicly, but not in print that I'm aware of, because I have not seen descriptions or depictions of the fossil remains that he illustrates, that he shows, and they do admittedly seem quite large, but this wasn't a giant. I mean, this, unfortunately, this sort of thing feeds into the current feeding frenzy about giants and Nephilim and all that goes with that.
Yeah.
But they were huge, hugely robust, heavily boned, heavily muscled. They were large in stature. I mean, large as in not necessarily would they appear to be giant by our standards today, but yet realizing that back then, the prior hominins were, 4 or 5 feet tall. Well, let me take us into to address the ultimate part of your question. Take a step back and remind the viewers of the efforts to categorize these relic hominoids. He didn't use the term at the time, but Ivan Sanderson came up with 4 different types that he generalized. And they still have some merit today, although I think even now there are some interesting potential stratifications of some of those. But basically you had what he called the neogiants, which were the Sasquatch-like creatures, which have a circum-Pacific distribution, North America, maybe South America, not quite, pretty sketchy evidence there, but across Eastern Asia, all the way up, skirting the Himalayas and ending in the west as far as the Caucasus Mountains. Probably not beyond, no evidence that I'm aware of oversized Sasquatch-like footprints. But we have footprint evidence. This, I'm not just going by the stories, but based on the footprint examples. Then you've got what he called the subhumans, which he thought was a relic ape simply. And I think there's good evidence to support that the Yeti, the best footprint evidence for Yeti, shows an opposable hallux, which suggests a more primitive hominoid, a more ape-like hominoid, with a very limited distribution in the very high subtropical valleys to temperate valleys of the Himalayas. Real sketchy evidence. I mean, there's only 3 maybe good sets of footprint attributable. And the most iconic, unfortunately, the Shipton, if it is legitimate, in my opinion, clearly suffers from a congenital malformation of the foot, which causes excessive enlargement of the first and second digits. And I can show you, from orthopedic texts, human examples that are almost indistinguishable in their appearance and their proportions. Well, as far as the overall condition. Okay, then you've got the little, what he called he called them pygmies, but unfortunately it's kind of misleading. And this would be the things like the orang pendek and the and Dutu, and in Southeast Asia there's a whole litany of names. Each tribe has its own distinctive name for these little people of the forest. And that one is really quite fascinating in light of the discoveries of these diminutive hominins, in Flores, namely Homo floresiensis. And for a very brief flash in the pan, that discovery, the sensation of that discovery, caused even some skeptics to acknowledge that, maybe there is something to the legends of other relic hominoids. And but again, without funding, without field work, without people undertaking to risk their reputation to pursue something like this. I mean, there have been a couple of exceptions. Dr. Gregory Forth, who's now retired, had did some great anticipatory work on the native traditions on Flores of these these phenomenon and recognized that they were empirical entities, as he called them, rather than mythological figures. Were quite distinct. And then let's see, I did the fourth one, the important one, the one we were actually getting is the almas, or almasti, which Sanderson referred to as Neanderthaloid. And these were quite distinct from the Sasquatch, the neogiants in his mind. They were much more human-like hominins in our current terminology, but yet were very primitive, were covered with hair. Even with potentially a larger brain size, they still had a much more, or had a non-human behavior pattern. And this is a fascinating, this one has kind of what's the word I'm after, is sort of run into choppy water because, in my opinion, there is so much political correctness surrounding discussions about Neanderthal. People have transposed issues of racism and so forth to the discussions of another anthropological species, and have made tremendous hay out of the very limited and in some of the known instances very ancient introgression of genetic material, crossbreeding. I mean, the oldest example has been estimated to have been about 165,000 years ago. I mean, that was even before the classic Neanderthal species had been established in Western Europe. And so, I mean, I would just simply pose the question, how is it that Homo sapiens and Neanderthal, if capable, at least in some instances, of producing viable offspring that generated some limited, very limited gene flow over a period of, I mean, if we go clear back 165,000 years, but when Homo sapiens proper, which only emerged 300,000, maybe 200 to 300,000 years ago, and then eventually moved into Europe, maybe about 40 to 60,000 years ago, with Neanderthals purportedly going extinct about 30,000, some allowing as recent as 24,000 years ago. But for tens of thousands of years, those two species were side by side, were neighbors in Europe. And yet they remained distinct. So after that 30,000 years, you could still find a skull and identify it as a full-blown Neanderthal skull. Over here is a full-blown Homo sapiens. Yeah. So, man, there must have been something very different that made those crossings very rare and unusual and singular. And so that brings into, the potential for fodder for the wild man traditions of Europe. And this is where we were talking, Daniel and I were talking earlier. If there is something to be discovered in Britain, I would tend to envision it as a relic of that period of time when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were coexisting. And eventually, Neanderthals got pushed to their most remote and least hospitable corners of their former distribution, and remained, and with very few numbers surviving, remained very rare and elusive, perhaps even to the present. I mean, even in some of the areas where there are Almasti reports, the locals say they are no more. They haven't had stories or encounters for decades, they say. So we may have unwittingly witnessed the final demise of a species, at least in some regions.
So I will mention, Dr. Meldrum, you are very, very liked in this chat. I'm reading so many comments going awesome, and there was this one a minute ago.
Everybody.
And then you've got that one, and you've got quite quite a few likes on here, but I do see you have one question on here from Tim.
Okay. Science of carbonic. Well, yes, I think this is an interesting, and we've talked about this, whether it's through eDNA or just through any type of DNA sequencing, that there is no precedent in zoology to acknowledge the existence of a new species on the basis of DNA alone. We use DNA to, say, differentiate specimens that have accumulated in museum drawers where we have bones and skins from which little tabs can be removed, and I've done that. But this would be a first. Now, there is a growing literature, in scientific literature, where there are discussions about the sort of ethics of collecting, lethally collecting specimens of rare and endangered species, where that removed specimen may have a dramatic impact, especially with something like a Sasquatch, a higher primate, an impact on the population and the family structure and so forth. And so it might be argued that the scientific community is ready to make that switch from kind of the Victorian ethic of shoot first and ask questions afterward to relying on a voucher specimen of DNA. It may require, independent corroboration, confirmation, in order to accept that. But there's a few examples where species have been recognized just by drawings, by sketches rather than, or a photograph rather, of a specimen. But even there, I'm not too familiar with the history. That involves things like marine mammals and so forth, where it's rather difficult to collect expired specimen of a rare and elusive marine cetacean or something.
It's just really, really interesting, and I will kind of. You've been asked this question before by I think myself and my granddad when we did our first interview, but I'll ask it again. Do you reckon finding the existence of Bigfoot would be great to the scientific community, and we should research, or do you reckon it's best to kind of leave them alone and kind of, because as humans we kind of do you get what I'm trying to say?
Well, of course, and I get this all the time from people who say, just leave them alone. They shouldn't draw attention to them. In some instances, it's kind of funny, the hypocrisy. That advice is coming from someone who's just posted their encounter with location and details and so forth on a web page when or they've sent it to me and with questions. And so my response is, well, if you really want this to be left alone, why are you talking about it to people? So anyway, but the point is, individual motivations can vary tremendously. There are a lot of people who think we should just leave it alone, and that some of that stems, from sincere altruistic concern. Some of it stems from this contrived them versus us, standing up against the scientific establishment, this David and Goliath kind of martyr syndrome. There are all sorts of different ideas. Now, what will be the impact? I think it'll be a great, refreshing dash of cold water in the face to the scientific community that they don't know it all. We don't know it all. There still are discoveries to be made. There still are mysteries to be solved, and the history has demonstrated that repeatedly, and yet people have such short memories. It seems they have such a myopic view. Will it overturn all theories? No, it won't. It'll add a chapter. As I said, the science is already underway in a trajectory of understanding hominin evolution, such that the insights that are emerging actually create space for the existence of such creatures. To recognize that there were, back through the history of the evolution of hominins, there have always been multiple species with diverse adaptations living contemporaneously across the landscape. And now the recognition that many of these, like Neanderthals and like Homo erectus and like others, have persisted until remarkably recently. Why would we assume then that suddenly every other branch on that bushy tree went extinct except for us? All at once. And so, no, I don't think it'll overturn. It will, it'll shake the egos maybe and confidence of some individuals who've been. But you'll see a lot of conversion. You'll see a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon. I knew it all along. I think it'll provide tremendous insights. I mean, I also get it from the religious side of things, where there's, people will ask me, well, what will this do to faith, to belief in God? And I said to this one individual, does the existence of a gorilla threaten your faith? And they thought for a minute, and they no. I said, well, this is just essentially, Bigfoot, anyway, in my opinion, is closely akin to an example of an upright walking gorilla. Not, if it is a hominin, it's so close to the split. It's so primitive and shows so few examples of advanced hominin evolution, certainly not anything on par with Homo and all that goes with being a member of that genus. So, when they see that, when they realize that here's one of the words for apes and primates is simian. Well, where does that come from? Similar, in similitude. They look like us, and so that similarity should not be. There's a whole fascinating history. I won't go into it here at this time, but when I teach Survey of Living Primates, we talk about some of the social, especially Western cultural perceptions of the primates. And for some Victorian era Christians, the existence of something that so resembled humans was a mockery. And so the apes were devilish. They were lascivious. They had no sense of propriety. They were the baboons in a zoo were showing off these big tumescent genital swellings and carrying on in full view of the onlookers. They were the devil incarnate. And then at the apes, the gorillas were even worse because they had cut off their tails in order to look more human. And there was actually a little play on words. The cauda, Latin for tail, and in the liturgy, the codex was the writ, was the authoritative writ, and so the devil had lost its tail, its codex, in other words, its authoritative claim to divine position. So there were all these interplays, and so it became a very religious, very politically charged perception, as opposed to, and I chalk it up to the fact that Western cultures grew up in the absence of these exotic, strange animals. But then you look at the history, the cultural interpretation of Eastern cultures where there were primates all around, and their perception, their attitude towards them is very, very different. Get off on a different side.
So we
got a couple of questions, but I just want to feed off of something you said earlier there, Dr. Meldrum, about, well, essentially the Homo sapien pushed out Neanderthal, and by competition eradicated all of its competition. And it's a little confusing how we managed to do it to Neanderthals when they were bigger, tougher, faster than us. There's this sort of little mystery. And it got me along the lines of thinking, with the Sasquatch or Bigfoot, we acknowledge, or we understand, accept that it crossed to the Americas on the land bridge in the Bering Strait during the last ice age. But I kind of am wondering if it was in the last ice age,
right,
or whether it was prior to that, and it gave the Sasquatch the opportunity, the separation from us, to evolve and become what it became today, and then possibly in the most recent ice age migrated back into Europe where we were dominating.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, you raised some interesting points. So first of all, let's roll it back to Asia, and because this Sasquatch species, whatever it was ultimately derived from, whether it was a giant Paranthropus, whether it was Gigantopithecus, whether it was any of a number of other as yet undiscovered species, some that have been hinted at by single teeth that have been mentioned in the literature but never formed the basis of a new species yet. So we know there were a lot more. There were, whatever that species was, it was already coexisting with Homo sapiens for a period of time. Now, whether that initial contact with Homo sapiens in Eastern Asia predated a distribution into North America, that remains to be seen. But you're right; it almost certainly wasn't the last ice age. I don't think. But we know that the land bridge between Asia and North America rose and fell numerous times, even clear back into the Pliocene. Now, Gigantopithecus blacki, let's just look at that. I mean, most species have a lifespan, if you will, as a species of about 1 million to 1.5 million years. There's very few examples that deviate. That's kind of the mean. And so, if we look at Gigantopithecus blacki, it probably was around, well before Homo sapiens arrived in East Asia. Now, during that period of time, there would have been connections between the continents. And the thing to bear in mind, this is a misnomer that people have, even people who should know better, they misconstrue it. It wasn't a migration in the sense of, to be facetious here, Gigantopithecus packing up its knapsack, or whatever, heading off into the sunrise to see what its fortune was across the way in this new virgin continent. That wasn't that at all. It was as the habitat waxed and waned, expanded and shrank with changing climates and changing sea levels and so forth, the animals that were native, were endemic to that habitat, would expand and shrink with the habitat. Their distribution would expand and shrink. So they were just part of the landscape. I mean, they were part of the ecology, the community. And that's how a forest-adapted bipedal hominin or hominoid would have made its way into North America. There was this one book, and I won't attribute it because there's two I have in my mind, and I can't remember now which of the two authors. But basically, he said, these Sasquatch enthusiasts, they'll have you believe or have you imagine a shuffling band of Gigantopithecus leaning into the icy wind as they cross the wasteland of the Bering Land Strait into a continent already occupied by hungry humans. I mean, every line of that little characterization is misconstrued, misrepresented. And so it's not this habitat was mixed coniferous and deciduous forest. It was a temperate forest that expanded from throughout Eastern Asia all the way down into southern China, and then all the way down across North America, even into the current southern states like Alabama. We have fossils of animals that are part of that fauna, like the little red panda, for example. teeth of which have been found all the way down in Alabama and up in Washington State. Now, if a little panda little raccoon-looking panda, a red panda, could make its way into North America, why not a bipedal hominin? I mean, along with all the other things. So that's now. I don't know if I covered all the bases on your. So making it back across into Europe. Well, again, we can hypothesize or we can speculate rather than even in this case speculate about such a movement into Europe. But again, it just boils down to the contemporary conditions, and this is something I'll probably go into more detail when we're speaking at the conference. But the available habitat, distribution of other animals with similar ecological requirements and so forth, and the trace evidence. I mean, even in the eastern United States, where there are loads of sightings, there are really very few compelling footprints to back those sightings up. And that doesn't necessarily surprise me, because even having acknowledged the possibility in the eastern states of the existence of Sasquatch, because the habitat is extensive enough, even though there's a lot more subdivision and private land and so forth, there's enough contiguous habitat that, for example, black bear persist in those areas, and black bear have a remarkably similar distribution with areas of credible reports of Sasquatch. But when you look, you have to look beyond just the distribution, the spatial distribution, and look at the numbers. And the population density of black bears back east is like, 1/5, 1/6 of what it is out in the western and intermountain states. And so that says something about the carrying capacity of the habitat in that region, and so might also reflect in much rarer numbers of Sasquatch in the eastern states versus out in the west. So, in Idaho, where I'm at, there's 35,000 black bear. In British Columbia, there's 110,000 black bear. But you go over to Kentucky, and maybe there's 2,000 black bear.
Yeah.
And
wow.
Well, there's you keep that in mind. I'm just that's kind of where I'm coming from, is across Europe, where there have, and particularly it seems an upsurge more recently. Where's the corroboration? Where's the footprint, the trace evidence to, because it's not a small thing when the difference between a Neanderthal that stood, the women stood on average, the females were like 5 foot to 5'2", and the males were 5'4" on average. And so they were smaller, stout, heavily muscled, and their skeletons were really dense, and the muscle markings, versus a creature that the female is 6.5 to 7 feet, the male may be 8.5 feet. Female weighs 700 pounds, the male may weigh 1,000, 1,200 pounds. I mean, it's like a bull moose. I don't know if you on that side of the pond have a sense of how big a bull moose is. If you've ever been to Yellowstone and a moose, you've had the pleasure of seeing a moose up fairly close. I mean, you stand next to one of these animals and you can't help but think about Pleistocene megafauna. I mean, these things are just massive. And so imagine a Sasquatch with that mass. Unless you've got, some pretty significant square mileage of habitat to support it and offer cover, and I don't think it's reasonable to think.
There are some questions coming in.
I will say, Chris, we could go for a few, because I can't believe it's been an hour already. If we get only go through a few, and then we kind of
well, you
save them
need
for the conference.
I know you have your program schedule, but you needn't stop on my account, just so you know. I'm perfectly happy to.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The first one you kind of touched on at the start. Do you believe that what Darby Orcutt is doing to help further the study of Sasquatch? Do you believe?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, I think it certainly will. Like I said, he seems from my interactions with him. I've given presentation for his class on 2 occasions now. We just scheduled the 3rd, but I've had the chance. We've also visited online like this extensively to better understand what it is he intends to do. But one thing that struck me from his various comments and so forth, that he has a real knack for networking with other colleagues, and because he's kind of opened the door at his institution to this topic being brought up in this course that he's teaching, he's gained a little notoriety that way, and so people have been more open in revealing their own interests, and more importantly, their willingness to contribute their expertise, whether it's hair analysis, whether it's genetics, whether it's stable isotope analysis of hair. These we were talking, and he has other projects in the wings that he wasn't at liberty to reveal to me at the time, which is always intriguing.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see where these things go. So I'm delighted, at my stage where I'm starting to not phase out, but I'm, especially with the health issues, curtailing my ambitious field undertakings, doing a lot more speaking, a lot more writing. It's gratifying to see. It's encouraging to see younger folks like that take up the gauntlet, the challenge of, and I think the environment is changing. I mean, we're seeing it in a turnover of generations. I see it in my interactions with young graduating PhDs, as well as conversations with elder statesmen and women that feel more at liberty to explore their curiosity. There is a little bit more of a tolerant, at least, environment, and I hope it has to do with some of the things that have occurred. I mean, I like to point out it's been like 15 years now already, but New Scientist magazine from your side of the pond had a special feature on the top 10 questions facing the study of human evolution, and number 9 was, are other hominins alive today? Now, unfortunately, the associate editor assigned that story. They had a story for each of the 10. That story was very poorly written and researched, but they did interview me, and I had a chance at least to get my nickel's worth in there. But everything, all the framing was very tongue-in-cheek, poo-poo, wink-wink, nod-nod, kind of attitude about it. But at least there was that acknowledgement. I mean, I can point to that now and say, look, at least these editors of this magazine, who must have some scientific credential, you would think, realized that, hey, this is a real thing.
I think a very British response to a question they'd rather avoid, or they didn't know the answer to. Yeah.
So, Dr. Meldrum, I can definitely say that everyone in this chat has absolutely loved this conversation, and so have I. It's been amazing. Now we've been an hour now, and there's a few things that I kind of want to have a chat to you after about. So,
sure.
I've written down all these questions, which means at our event, if you're able to answer them, that'll be amazing.
Great, certainly.
Yeah.
Be happy to take.
So, just a few things about the event then, guys, because we have 20 people watching us right now. Numbers have been going up and down. But to everyone, this is welcome to the Cryptid Conference UK. This is the start. The date is on the 20th of July, Saturday the 20th of July. I will be announcing kind of our website and our page. If you search on Facebook, Cryptid Conference UK, you will see this logo pop up, and that is going to be our website. And obviously, I'll get Dr. Meldrum to start to post a few things that about his talk, and kind of he will have his own table at our event, even though he's not there. You guys, whilst you're there, you're more welcome to write down questions for him that we can ask him during his talk. But Dr. Meldrum, I want to thank you so much for this. Everyone's loved it. I've loved it, and I think Chris has loved it.
Oh yes, definitely so. Yeah.
Well, great. Appreciate that. Thanks.
So thank you to everyone for kind of watching, and thank you so much to our amazing guest, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. And this last comment, Dr. Meldrum is fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Meldrum. Right, thank you, guys.
A lot of people saying hello to you, Dr. Meldrum.
Yep. Well, thank you. Hello back.
Is my screen blank or what? Nobody could see me?
Right. Keep searching and stay mythical, guys.
If you are interested in the mysterious and unexplained, then you wouldn't want to miss the upcoming conference presented by the Unidentified Network. This event will host a variety of speakers and signing opportunities from the most respected researchers and personalities from all over the world. You can enjoy interactive exhibits and vendors all centered around the fascinating world of cryptids. Whether you are a seasoned cryptozoology enthusiast or just curious about these elusive creatures, there is something for everyone at the Cryptid Conference UK. Don't miss this chance to connect with fellow fans and learn more about the world's most elusive creatures. Join us for an unforgettable event and connect with fellow fans from all over the world. July 20th, 2024, Highbridge, Somerset. The Unidentified Network proudly presents the Cryptid Conference UK.